Centuries before canned food, native cooks mastered survival dishes that could keep armies marching, children full, and communities alive during brutal winters. No flour, no sugar, yet meals strong enough to last. One recipe was so big, it needed a pit to cook. The final entry will blow your mind. Here are 20 forgotten native recipes. Number 10. Blue corn mush. Blue corn mush is one of those deceptively simple recipes that carried entire communities through lean times. Among the Navajo, or Diné, it was more than food. It was culture, medicine, and identity. Blue corn itself is unique. Its darker kernels contain higher levels of anthocyanins, antioxidants that give it a nutritional edge over yellow corn. Archaeological evidence shows blue corn cultivation going back over 2,000 years in the American Southwest, where water was scarce and every harvest mattered. To prepare mush, finely ground blue cornmeal was cooked slowly in water, sometimes with juniper ash added. That ash wasn't just flavor, it supplied calcium and made the dish more alkaline, improving digestion and unlocking niacin in the corn, much like the nixtamalization process in Mesoamerica. This small scientific trick, discovered long before labs, prevented malnutrition diseases like pellagra. For the Diné, mush was tied to ceremonies. It might be given at weddings, baby blessings, or healing rituals. It filled bellies but also connected people to their land because corn itself is considered a sacred gift. In times of scarcity, a single pot of mush could be stretched to feed dozens. Add wild herbs, berries, or bits of meat when available, and it transformed from humble porridge into a feast. Soldiers and anthropologists in the 19th century recorded seeing vast kettles of blue mush shared among families at community gatherings. It was survival disguised as simplicity, just corn, water, fire, and patience. And yet, it carried enough nutrition to sustain life in one of the harshest climates in North America. Number 9. Acorn bread. For California tribes like the Miwok, Pomo, and Yokuts, the mighty oak tree was more than shelter. It was a year-round food supply. Acorns were everywhere, carpeting the ground each autumn, but they couldn't be eaten raw. Packed with tannins, they were bitter, even toxic in high amounts. Yet native peoples developed a precise method to transform these bitter nuts into nourishing bread that could last months. The process began with gathering and sorting acorns, then cracking shells and pounding the kernels into meal. Women often used stone mortars. Archaeologists have found bedrock mortars with depressions worn smooth from centuries of pounding. The meal was then carefully leached with running water, sometimes by placing it in sand basins near streams. This step removed the tannins, leaving behind mild, edible flour. The flour could be mixed with water and baked into dense loaves or flatbreads, sometimes sweetened with berries or flavored with herbs. In other regions, acorn mush or soup was more common, but bread had the advantage of being portable and storable. Nutritionally, acorns are surprisingly powerful, high in complex carbohydrates, good fats, and protein. A pound of acorn meal can yield nearly 1,500 calories, an invaluable resource in lean months. Ethnographers recorded that one oak grove could feed an entire village through winter. Acorn bread was more than sustenance. In some California tribes, it was part of first food ceremonies, marking a child's introduction to solid food. It was also a survival guarantee. Even in drought or failed harvest, the oaks gave. Settlers arriving in California often mocked acorn bread as primitive, yet many secretly adopted it when their own supplies ran short. With almost nothing but patience and skill, whole communities could thrive on the humble acorn loaf. Number 8. Wild rice and berry mix. Among the Ojibwe, Dakota, and other Great Lakes peoples, wild rice, known as manuman, wasn't just food. It was a sacred gift from the Creator, so important that migration stories describe ancestors being led to a place where food grows on the water. That food was wild rice, waving like fields across lakes and rivers. Harvesting was a communal ritual. Families in birch bark canoes would bend the ripe stalks over and gently knock kernels into the boat with sticks called ricing knockers. Even today, Minnesota and Wisconsin protect wild rice harvest by law with strict rules on methods. Nutritionally, Manoomin is remarkable, higher in protein than brown rice, rich in B vitamins, zinc, magnesium, and fiber. Mixed with dried berries like cranberries or chokecherries, it became porridge, salad, or trail food. Add a few nuts, and you had a dish that could energize warriors, hunters, or whole gatherings. A bushel of wild rice, about 35 pounds, can feed 100 people easily. Archaeological evidence shows it was stored in underground caches, lasting through brutal winters. Jesuit missionaries in the 1600s wrote about feasts where wild rice dishes were shared in vast wooden bowls, flavored with maple sugar or venison fat. It wasn't just survival, it was ceremony. Dances, songs, and offerings accompanied the harvest because Manoomin was life itself. Settlers later exploited it, but native communities still fight to protect lakes from pollution, reminding us that this simple grain has been sustaining people for at least 800 years. When you add in the berries, you get not only calories, but also natural preservatives and vitamins. A pot of wild rice and berry mix could outlast fresh meat or vegetables, making it both survival food and cultural glue. Number 7. Canucci, hickory nut soup. The Cherokee had a genius way of turning something as tough as a hickory nut into a creamy, calorie-rich soup. Canucci begins with cracking hickory shells and pounding the kernels into a paste. The nut oils and meat combine into a butter-like consistency, which is then simmered with hominy until it thickens into a hearty broth. This wasn't a quick snack. Preparing canucci took hours of labor, often done by women who carefully cracked nuts with stone pestles, saving every crumb. Archaeologists have uncovered ancient nutting stones, some thousands of years old, worn deep from generations of pounding hickory. Nutritionally, hickory nuts are loaded, about 650 calories per 100 grams, rich in protein, healthy fats, and minerals. Add hominy, and you've got a dish balanced with carbs and fiber. A single kettle of canucci could feed dozens, which made it ideal for large gatherings. Canucci wasn't just for daily meals, it often appeared at ceremonies or seasonal feasts. In Cherokee oral tradition, hickory trees were considered generous spirits, offering strength through their nuts and wood. Early European settlers noted the unique flavor, comparing it to walnut soup but creamier. One remarkable detail: canucci could be stored as nut balls, compacted paste that was dried and saved for later. Hunters carried them into the mountains, dissolving them in hot water for instant soup, an ingenious survival hack centuries before packaged bouillon. Even during forced removal on the Trail of Tears in the 1830s, Cherokee families tried to carry hickory nut paste to sustain themselves on the brutal march. It was food, memory, and resilience all boiled into one. Number 6. Bison or buffalo stew. On the open plains, survival often came down to the buffalo. For Lakota, Cheyenne, Blackfoot, and countless plains tribes, the buffalo was more than food, it was life itself. Nearly every part of the animal was used: hide for shelter, bones for tools, sinew for bowstrings, and of course, meat for sustenance. A single buffalo could feed over 100 people, and when stewed with roots, wild onions, prairie turnips, or herbs, it became a communal meal, both hearty and symbolic. Travelers wrote of kettles large enough to simmer hundreds of pounds of meat, seasoned only with what the land offered. The stew was rich in protein and fats, perfect fuel for hunters and warriors. Nutritional studies show that buffalo meat is leaner than beef, yet packed with iron and B12. Combined with starchy roots, a pot of buffalo stew delivered balanced nutrition. Archaeologists have uncovered buffalo kill sites like the head-smashed-in buffalo jump in Alberta, Canada, where hundreds of animals were harvested in coordinated hunts that could sustain entire villages through winter. Stew wasn't just food, it was also diplomacy. Shared buffalo feasts sealed alliances, celebrated victories, or honored the spirits. In some accounts, marrow bones were cracked open and added for extra richness, a tradition that captured every last calorie from the hunt. When the U.S. government sanctioned mass buffalo slaughters in the 19th century, tribes lost not just an animal, but an entire food system. The disappearance of buffalo stew symbolized cultural erasure. Yet today, buffalo herds are returning, and with them, traditional recipes are being revived, connecting communities back to their resilience. Number 5. Three Sisters. Stew corn, beans, and squash, the Three Sisters, formed the backbone of indigenous agriculture across North America. But their genius wasn't just in the field. When combined in a single stew, they created one of the earliest examples of a nutritionally complete plant-based meal. Corn provided carbohydrates, beans supplied protein, and squash offered vitamins and fiber. Together, they formed a synergy modern nutritionists still marvel at. Native farmers perfected this system over 5,000 years, planting corn stalks to support climbing beans, while squash leaves shaded the soil to keep it moist and weed-free. In the pot, the harmony continued. Iroquois longhouse feasts often featured Three Sisters stews ladled into wooden bowls. Spanish chroniclers in the 1500s noted how indigenous diets relied heavily on these trio crops, yet people remained healthier than European peasants living on wheat bread and pork fat. Recipes varied, sometimes spiced with wild herbs, other times enriched with venison or fish. But even plain, the stew was deeply sustaining. A bushel of beans and corn could be stretched with squash to feed dozens, and all three stored well through winter. Beyond nutrition, the dish carried spiritual meaning. Each sister represented interdependence. Corn was the elder, strong and tall. Beans the giver, replenishing the soil. Squash the protector, guarding the roots. Eating them together reminded people of the balance between humans and nature. Today, indigenous chefs are reintroducing Three Sisters dishes in schools and community centers as a way to fight food insecurity. What was once survival food has become a symbol of sustainable farming and cultural revival. Number 4. Pashoffa, white corn soup. Among the Choctaw and Chickasaw, Pashoffa was more than a dish. It was a ritual in a pot. At its heart was cracked hominy, white corn that had been dried, pounded, and sometimes nixtamalized to release its nutrients. Simmered slowly for hours in clay pots, Pashoffa thickened into a creamy, hearty base. Sometimes it was plain, flavored only with salt. Other times, bits of pork or venison were added for richness. What made Pashoffa remarkable wasn't just its taste, but its endurance. A pot could be reheated day after day, shared at feasts, and even eaten cold when families traveled. Anthropologists recorded large outdoor gatherings where Pashoffa kettles were so big they had to be stirred with wooden paddles taller than a man. One pot could serve dozens, making it both economical and communal. Ceremonially, Pashoffa carried healing power. During the Pashoffa dance, sick individuals were ritually treated, while community members shared the soup as part of the process. It was a dish of solidarity, where nourishment symbolized both physical and spiritual renewal. Nutritionally, hominy provided dense carbohydrates and fiber, while optional meat boosted protein. A bushel of corn, cracked and boiled, could sustain entire villages during lean months. Missionary accounts in the 1800s describe how Chickasaw families relied on it through winters when hunting failed. Even today, Pashoffa is served at tribal gatherings in Oklahoma. Recipes passed down through grandmothers are still used, tying present generations to centuries of resilience. It remains proof that a simple bowl of corn can carry culture, memory, and survival. Number 3. Tamales/zacahuil. Tamales are iconic across Mesoamerica, but the zacahuil, the giant tamal, is on another level. Made by Huastec and other indigenous groups in Mexico, it could stretch over 3 feet long, wrapped in banana or agave leaves, and slow-baked in an underground pit. This single dish could feed between 50 and 200 people, making it the ultimate festival food. The foundation was masa, nixtamalized corn dough that carried both calories and nutrition. Into this base went beans, chili peppers, or bits of pork, turkey, or venison, depending on availability. Layers of dough and filling were carefully stacked, then wrapped in massive leaves, tied with vines, and cooked for up to 24 hours over hot coals. Historically, zacahuil was tied to community celebrations, weddings, harvests, or religious feasts. Spanish chroniclers in the 16th century marveled at indigenous banquets where hundreds were fed with a single tamal. Beyond its size, the zacahuil embodied cooperation, since preparing it required many hands. Nutritionally, tamales were ideal: corn for energy, beans for protein, peppers for vitamins, and meat for extra strength. Wrapped and steamed, they also preserved well for days, perfect for feeding travelers or soldiers. Even today, families in Veracruz and Hidalgo still prepare zacahuil for fiestas, baking them in outdoor pits. The tradition hasn't died, it's simply adapted. A recipe that once ensured survival now fuels celebration, proving how food built for endurance can also embody joy. Number 2. Sagamite. Stu Caddo, Osage, and other tribes across the Mississippi Valley often gathered around steaming pots of sagamite. At first glance, it was simple: cornmeal thickened in boiling water, then enriched with beans, wild greens, and animal fat. Yet this humble stew was central to ceremony and diplomacy. French explorers in the 1600s described being welcomed into villages with bowls of sagamite, a gesture of both hospitality and alliance. What made it powerful wasn't just its warmth, but its scalability. Corn was abundant, easy to store, and high in calories. Mixed with fat from deer, bear, or fish, sagamite became a dish that could stretch to feed entire gatherings. Archaeological evidence shows that massive clay pots, sometimes over 2 feet wide, were used to prepare it. Ethnographers later recorded recipes that varied by season. Sometimes nut meats or squash were added, sometimes smoked venison. Nutritionally, it was balanced: carbohydrates from corn, protein from beans, fats from meat, and vitamins from wild greens. A pot could easily feed 50 to 100 people, especially during seasonal festivals. French missionary accounts noted its thick, porridge-like texture, filling enough to sustain travelers for days. But sagamite was more than food. It carried meaning. Sharing it signified unity, and the act of cooking together reinforced community bonds. To refuse sagamite was to refuse friendship. In this way, it wasn't just sustenance, it was politics in a bowl. Today, some native communities still cook sagamite for cultural events, keeping alive a recipe that once stitched together both bellies and alliances. Number 1. Pemmican. No native recipe matches the sheer survival power of pemmican. Created by Plains and Cree peoples, it was designed for endurance. Strips of lean bison or venison were dried until brittle, then pounded into a powder. Melted fat, sometimes equal in weight to the meat, was poured in, binding it together. For sweetness and vitamins, dried berries like chokecherries or blueberries were added. The result was astonishing: lightweight, portable, and incredibly calorie-dense. 1 pound of pemmican could pack over 3,000 calories, enough to fuel a hunter for days. Properly stored, it lasted for years without spoiling. Fur traders and later Arctic explorers relied heavily on it. In fact, the Hudson's Bay Company once required pemmican shipments because no other food compared for efficiency. For native nations, it was more than trail rations. It was security. Women usually prepared it in large batches after a buffalo hunt, ensuring families survived harsh winters. During the 19th century, the Pemmican Wars broke out when rival fur traders clashed over control of this precious resource, proof of its economic power. Archaeological and written records show pemmican kept explorers alive on journeys spanning thousands of miles. It's no exaggeration to say that entire expeditions would have starved without it. Modern nutritionists still marvel. Protein, fat, and carbohydrates combined in near-perfect balance. Centuries before, science explained why it worked. Among indigenous people, pemmican is remembered as both sustenance and legacy. Each cake or ball carried the strength of the buffalo, the care of women who prepared it, and the resilience of nations who refused to vanish. A single recipe, born of necessity, ended up feeding both survival and history. Thanks for exploring these forgotten recipes with me. If you're hungry for more hidden history and food secrets, check out my other videos. Don't miss what's coming next. Hit subscribe, stay curious, and keep uncovering the past one story at a time.